Do you like books? I mean, really, really like books? Then you're in the right place. Each week, your host, Sam Hankin, interviews the best of today's top-selling authors and the up-and-coming superstars of modern literature. This is The Avid Reader. Here is your host, Sam Hankin.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, as always, for joining us here on The Avid Reader, brought to you by Wellington Square Bookshop. Today, our guest is Azar Nafisi, author of Read Dangerously, The Subversive Power of Literature in Troubled Times. These are troubled times. Azar is best known for her 2003 book, Reading Lolita in Tehran, which remained on the New York Times bestseller list for like 2 years, and was one of my mother's favorite books, and she bought several of them and would just hand them out to anyone who came to her door. In addition to Reading Lolita, Azar has authored Things I've Been Silent About, Memories of a Prodigal Daughter, The Republic of Imagination, America in 3 books, and That Other World, Nabokov, and The Puzzle of Exile. So what does it mean to be subversive, which is our title, and we can talk about the title and the cover. And so it's a scary word. Webster's, if you read Webster's definition, it's not what she's saying, but Webster's definition is a systematic attempt to overthrow or undermine a government or political system by persons working from within. And that could apply to a lot of people. So we'll find out who it's supposed to apply to and who the reader is actually supposed to be and supposed to do. So welcome to the show, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, yeah, since I own a bookstore, as I said, the cover is very important, and it's a really good cover. And it's a cover that seems like a combination of chaos, which is the times we're in, but also this kind of solidarity as well. And so I'm wondering, one, what I was saying about subversive, what did you mean? Because there it is right on the cover. What did you mean when you said subversive?
Well, I was just, when you were saying that, I remembered something from James Baldwin when he says artists are here to disturb the peace. I mean, the whole idea of art is to not give you the answers you already know or confirm what you want to be confirmed. It always takes you into unknown waters, into places that have existed, but you didn't know they exist. So it can have, and maybe as far as I'm concerned, should have a destabilizing effect. It makes us question. And the important thing about it is that it's easy to question others always. But what art does, it also turns inward and it becomes a mirror into which we can look. So I meant subversive in that sense, in the sense that it makes you a little uncomfortable, but it's a good kind of a little uncomfortable.
And those are the kinds of books. Well, actually, one way we could talk, all the books you've mentioned or talked about in your book are books that I love as well. But even if we just talk about the first triumvirate of Rushdie, Plato, and Bradbury, that was an interesting one to me because it goes through all these different times and places and different types of people. But maybe the one that would be a good foundation for the book would be the idea of blindness or the refusal to see. So maybe we could talk a little bit about Plato and the cave and how that applies to your book.
Wow. Yeah, that is an amazing, the cave has been talked about for over 2,000 years now, and it's still relevant to today, and it still can be disturbing because the whole point is that these people are shackled, and they have to, there's a screen in front of them, and what they see of the real world is the shadows. They don't see the world, and they are in darkness. And the question is, what if one of them gets out and that, well, to begin with, that one, the light hurts his eyes. It is subversive. It doesn't make him, it makes him want to go back to where he came from. And Plato asks Glaucon that whether these people want to leave the cave, and would they kill if they leave the cave? And the answer is yes, they don't want to leave the cave because the light hurts. So the whole point that Plato is making is that knowledge can be dangerous. Sometimes we prefer to be comfortable and complacent in one place, although it is in darkness and in shackles, rather than taste the uncertainty, but the glorious uncertainty of knowledge and the freedom that it brings with it, that not all of us are after freedom. We talk about it, but whether we want it or not is something else.
Problem I have with that is that, for example, Prometheus and his liver being eaten every day. What a courageous and willing to suffer for mankind person, but nonetheless, his liver has continued to be eaten every day for eternity. Or you take someone, one of my heroes, Greta Thunberg. She's doing her best to change something, but by rowing across the Atlantic by herself, she's doing the right thing. But the question is, how much does it mean materially? And I'll shut up in a minute. And with regard to Plato, the thing is, when he comes back in and tries to drag them out, they are repelled by him. They want to murder him. And I wouldn't normally bring up Trump, but you bring him up a lot in your book. And so the Trump supporters, they would be those other two prisoners. They wouldn't, right? Wouldn't they?
They would be the prisoners, but how much do they know? I mean, ignorance is not always bliss, unfortunately. And the fact is that people are scared of knowing, because knowing in itself, especially knowing the truth in itself, means doing something about it. And that can become dangerous. And so people with Trump, while they are repeating what he's saying and have created a dehumanized enemy in Democrats and those that disagree with them, feel comfortable. This white hat, black hat type of a situation is comfortable to many of us. And I mean us, I'm not saying they. The danger is becoming like them, while you think you're fighting them.
Well, when you talk about Trump, some would call me a fatalist. I think of myself as a pragmatist. You talk about it in somewhat optimistic terms, as if he's gone. But since you began writing this book, not only is he not gone, but we have January 6th insurrectionists, and you remember this from your own father and your country. Now he wants to pardon them. And the Congress probably in 2022 will be Republican. The Supreme Court is 6-3. They've gerrymandered and voter suppression and Republican governors and banning books, whether it's the Bluest Eye or Art Spiegelman's Mouse last week.
Yeah.
So where does your optimism, if you are, where does it come from?
Well, there is a quotation which I'm going to mutilate because I don't remember it as well as I should, by the amazing Václav Havel, the former, the first president of Czech Republic after the Soviet Union fell, and of course an activist and a playwright. So he says, hope is not optimism. Hope is not the conviction that something will end up well, but rather the certainty that it makes sense, no matter how well it ends. So I have hope, not optimism. And I think that we don't have much choice. We have to do what we have to do. We have to stand up to, well, right now we're talking to Trump, but we have to stand up to that kind of a mindset and not allow it to take over us. Because something that I mentioned in my book, especially in the Baldwin chapter, is that our enemy, quote unquote, and I hate to use this word for, just throw it around, our enemy can take over, one by literally taking over us, and the other one by occupying us, occupying our minds, defining the way we spend our life, because we are constantly thinking about them and hating them. That is just as dangerous as giving in to them, yielding to them. So we need to be firm, but at the same time, without hatred. Hatred of the system, but without hatred of individuals.
Well, I would like to say that you and I are people that listen to other people and have the intelligence to hold both views in our mind simultaneously. But civil discourse, another cliche, seems to be gone in America. Would you argue with that?
No, that is why, I have no other quote unquote weapon but writing and talking about it, and reading other people. I won't disagree with you at all. I think that is why people like you and I should persevere. That is why that bookstore you have becomes so essential, not just to you, but to people who live in your community and the larger circle. Each bookstore that vanishes, a part of us vanishes, no matter which part of the country that happens. So we have to get together on this and support one another, support writers, support bookstore owners, support libraries, actively do that.
With courage, which brings me to the question I probably should have asked first. The book, for those who haven't yet read it, is written in the form of, it's almost an epistolary book. It's a series of letters to your deceased father. How did you choose? Because it's unusual to do a book in that fashion. How did you choose, and why? I mean, it seems so heartfelt to me. You can feel it. Why did you choose to do it that way?
Well, when the idea for this book came to my mind, I didn't want it to be in the traditional essay form. I knew that I don't want that. It just didn't work. And I was dabbling in letters, writing letters like Saul Bellows Herzog almost to everybody, including Trump, in fact. And I wrote a letter to my father, a letter to Trump, to Abraham Lincoln, to this amazing artist, Parastu Puruhar, whose parents were knifed to death by the Islamic Republic's vigilantes. So I was writing these letters. So at first, but it wouldn't work. Abraham Lincoln and Parastu Puruhar wouldn't work in a book. They would work in my diary, pages of my diary. Then I decided the writers I would choose to write about, I would put that in form of a letter. That became too artificial. So my next, I was talking about this to a friend, and she said, why don't you write to a third person? And almost immediately my father came to my mind, almost immediately. And I felt writing and reading is an intimate act, but I want that other intimacy, that personal one, because literature for me started with my father. That was how we shaped the best of our relationship. And so once I started addressing him, things fell into place. And from then on, it went on much better.
And also what's really good about it is you tell it, you give us your father. You even though they're letters to your father, we learn who he was and how courageous he was. And just like I've forgotten, not the dissident in Russia who went back, just like your dad, knowing
yes, he was amazing. Navalny? I don't remember.
No, yeah, it's close. You know, after being poisoned and knowing if he went back, just like your dad. And I don't know if I could do that. It's just like when you put it.
You don't know.
No, you don't know.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm just thinking that's a really good point. I don't know. I tend to say to myself, oh, you couldn't do that, but that's not the right answer.
We surprise ourselves, thank God, you know.
Yeah, I didn't think about it that way. But then again, you know, when I was reading his letter to Lyndon Johnson, which was a great letter, but it was a long letter too.
Yeah, it was a long letter.
And I wonder if Lyndon Johnson actually read it. I wonder if I don't know who is willing to listen anymore. That's what's scary. I don't know who would be willing to read that letter and say, oh, you know what? Instead of saying, oh, what's this Iranian guy writing me for? I don't care. You know, instead of doing that, actually what your book is saying, look at these, whether it's the bluest eye or their eyes were watching God. Rather than me talking, why don't you explain why you chose those two books?
They got me in my heart. Actually, all those books came from the heart. But with Zora Neale Hurston, what I felt was that here we are dealing with two African-American women, and it is obvious the oppression they had been under, and the way each of the women in the novel, Pecola in Morrison's Bluest Eye and Janie in Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Are Watching God, the way they react to their oppression, to their victimhood. Pecola, who's a young girl in her teens, and she falls for the way her oppressor defines her, and that happens a lot. So she believes that she's nothing and she's ugly, and that for her to be beautiful, she wants to have blue eyes. And that whole desire, that urge for the blue eyes shapes her whole life, which is a life that is paralyzed by the other, you know. Now, Janie is exact opposite. She is a rebel and the best kind of rebel is the one that doesn't know she's a rebel. She's just doing it by nature, who defies both the white person by not paying attention to them, by, you know, being who she is. And her grandmother's philosophy, she rejects that as well, because her grandmother also is defined by the white man and is always afraid that Janie won't do something that would hurt her because of what her grandmother had gone through. There is something to Zora Neale Hurston. Her focus in her books and in her life was on the individual dignity, on independence of the self. She kept telling her fellow African-American writers to not pay so much attention to the whites, to write independent of them, to create something of yourself, you know. And that fascinated me, that going for independence in that way. So
And the funny thing is, she got blowback from both races.
Yes.
You know, yeah.
Yes.
And again, that takes courage. I was thinking, because you know what was poignant when you were attempting to reach your friend in Iran, and
Oh God.
yeah, that was so difficult for you. Tell us a little bit about that, because it's important.
Well, I was talking about in Iran, almost every month there's a protest going on, which is put down very violently. This one was over the hiking in price of petrol in Iran, and the protest started with that, but it went into asking for the downfall of the regime. And but they were peaceful protesters. They had no guns, they had no even sticks in their hands, and the government treated them with utmost brutality. According to Reuters, 1,500 were killed. They would just fire into the crowd. It was reported that they were firing from helicopters into crowds, and just people dying. And I was going frantic because I was trying to get in touch with Iran to know that my friends and family are okay, and I couldn't get through because they had blocked the phones too. That scene you're talking about, I was trying to call, and every once in a while I would go and call, and I wouldn't, until finally she had left a message for me, and then I talked to her, and all I could tell her was, "Are you okay?" and count other people. Is Khosrow okay? Is Shahla okay? You know, and on and on. She said, one way or another, they'll kill us. If not by the guns, by pollution, which is so terrible now. And yeah.
Well, the other thing about her, which is courageous, and also is that she go, "Oh yeah, we're doing just great. It's just fine.
Yeah.
Everything is perfect." And you know, you have that anger, but it's justified anger, and it's like a real honest, like sarcasm, but it's a really good way of conveying. Yeah, and you did a good job of conveying that tone.
Yeah, she's amazing.
Sounds like it.
I hope one day I can use her name and she can come here. But
yeah, that's what I thought. But it's funny when Americans think about Iran. I remember when I was a little kid and the Shah was there, Americans almost made him seem like Santa Claus, you know. But at the same time, I couldn't figure out, how do you feel and how did your dad feel? I mean, you have the Shah, then you have the Ayatollah. Both choices seem less, at the very least, less than optimal. So when will or has the government there been one that was actually relatively fair in the past 50 years?
Of course, to be fair, the Shah is not comparable with what happened later. I mean, we had cultural and social freedoms, women especially, just we had the second in the world woman minister for women's affairs and all of that. This government is a Stalinist fascist government. I mean, it is a totalitarian state. I mean, they changed the laws. For example, the age of marriage for females from 18 to 9. They brought what they called punishing people for what they called adultery and prostitution by stoning people to death. So this is a different story. My father could at least have a trial and speak and be exonerated. This wouldn't have happened now. But we have been fighting for freedom for a century. Our mistake was not that we wanted a better, a freer political life. That is not our mistake. Our mistake was that we didn't know what we were replacing that system with. We kept not wanting the Shah, but not knowing what the Ayatollah was all about. You don't want to bring someone worse than the Shah to power. You know, you have to bring someone more democratic minded. And there were people who were more democratic minded.
And again, you know, I feel maybe you would call it fatalistic, but you know, our Constitution has had a really good run. There aren't any constitutions that have lasted as long as ours. And now that these things are creeping up, it's just as in your country, sometimes you don't realize it's just a step, a step, a step. And that's what happens. You don't realize. And how, yes, your book is going to be read by people like me and people who support your position, but is it going to be read by Mitch McConnell?
I was hoping it would be read by some rank and file who are not that corrupt, you know. But I know what you're saying, and it is tragic. I mean, I read the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, and coming where I'm coming from, I'm very sensitized to question of freedom in this country. You know, I mentioned in reading Lolita at the end of it, a quotation by Saul Bellow, where he says something to the effect that those who survive the ordeal of Holocaust, how will they survive the ordeal of freedom? Now, freedom is an ordeal. And I feel that in America, at some point, a lot of us forgot that freedom is an ordeal, that it needs to be nurtured.
So one of the other things I found interesting with regard to attitudes about individuals was I was very surprised that you brought in the author Ayn Rand, because when I was a little kid, I just like you, I read every single book, We the Living and Atlas Shrugged and Anthem, every single one. And at that time, I thought this was the greatest author in the world. And of course, our viewpoints have changed.
Yes, I did too when I was much younger. It does appeal to the very young. It does appeal. I can see that the superhero characters in Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, you know, sort of get you. But then sometimes it's good to grow up. Sometimes it's not. But
yeah, it's almost like it's almost like you said, like superheroes, like a Marvel movie, like the Avengers.
Yeah, the way they talked, even, you know. And this guy I talk about, Dan, was in love with her, more in love with her than he was with Plato. I mean,
yes, the virtue of selfishness, you know.
Yes, the virtue.
Yeah, I know. And that's the other thing about the book is that, you know, if you have read these books, you want to read them again because of the book. But you also, if you haven't read the book, I think that's the most important thing, whether you're a bookseller or an author, is that someone who hasn't read the book.
Yeah.
That's a blessing, I think.
Yeah.
And yeah, go ahead. Yeah. And you chose so many. Talk about, because most people don't know this book, To the End of the Land.
Oh God, that is such a beautiful book. I mean, it's by the Israeli writer David Grossman, and he, of course, is anti-occupation of Palestine, and although he participated in a war, he's against the war. So this book is about a woman whose son has gone to the battleground, and she is worried about him being killed, and thinks that if she is not there when people come to the door to bring the news of his death, somehow magically he would not die. And anyway, to make a long story short, her son and her were supposed to go on a camping trip before he went back to the battleground. And she goes and picks her friend and former lover, who's also the father of that son, and they travel all across the land, and they talk, they tell stories. And I feel like Shahrazad in 1001 Nights, she tells the story, and through telling the stories about, and talking, having a conversation with her lover, she gives her son, that magic potion which would keep him alive. So through writing, actually not writing, through talking about him, she rescues him from death. Of course, that's what I'm saying. I don't know if he's rescued or not.
Yeah, and that's the other thing that's poignant about the book is, and this is also what I like, is that you leave the reader with questions. Was this, how will she continue? How will this end? And one of the things, and sometimes it's just very parenthetically when you bring up the last temptation of Christ. And if you've read it, it's like, basically Jesus is saying, God, I really don't want to do this. Could you pick somebody else? This is really going to be a royal pain in the butt to do this. And, but he does it. He does it nonetheless. And one of the things I took away from the book is that even if you don't know, especially like in your country and your friend, even if you don't know or don't think that you can prevail, like our dissidents and like your dad, that you still have to move in that direction. Yeah. You have no choice.
It is what Zora Neale Hurston would do. You are true to your values and principles, not because they would succeed in the world, but because they're worth doing. And because your life would definitely have a meaning that it would not have had we not done what we wanted and we should have done, so I have no doubt about it. And when I grow older and I really feel that I need to be true to my own values and hope that they will be successful, but not count on it.
When I look at your YouTube videos, and when one of the gentlemen said you were going to perform together, I didn't consider it like essentially a performance, but when you're reading with somebody, how have you found, well, in the past and now with this book, that your intellectual peers, your author peers, how have they responded to this book thus far? I'm just curious.
Well, actually, right now, not many have, 2 reviews have come out, and they have been very, maybe undeservedly, very positive, but we're waiting for the rest. But 1 or 2 friends who have read, they were the ones that I talked about the book before it came out, and they were very enthusiastic. They were very. My husband read it, and 2 of my friends read it, and my children are just getting to read it. So
well, maybe I was premature with that one, but I guess in closing. Just like, no pun intended, but it's bookended by 2 words or 1 phrase in a word. Yes, it's subversive. And then you end somewhat provocatively by saying, and you say, I can't help it. And it's like, readers of the world unite. And you're paraphrasing the last line of the Communist Manifesto.
Yeah, I thought that is an act of subversion, that I steal it from them and change it and change the meaning. And so, yeah. But I do hope that readers of the world would unite. I do hope now that they're banning books in this country and putting so much pressure on libraries, bookstores, and schools, that we create subversive, my aim is to create subversive book groups in every school.
I do the same. And the other thing, like you, but not nearly as effective, is I tried to take the most subversive books and put them on the front table of my bookstore.
That's great. I have to visit your bookstore.
Oh, I wish you would. It would be so great. Well, thank you so much for coming today. And thank you so much for writing the book. And upon its release, I will have it up front and in the window. So once again, and like I said, the last thing, my mother was, you were her hero.
My best to her. Who knows? Maybe we'll get to talk with her.
That'd be great. I'll see you. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye. Bye.